is E&P Reports, a vodcast from editor and publisher. Since 1884, the authoritative voice of news publishing. And this episode sponsored by IQ Audience Plus by Town News. Consumer revenue has never been more important. Digital leaders at media organizations worldwide understand the need to accelerate its growth now. Plus, traditional one-size-fits-all paywalls aren't the answer. They're blunt instruments that treat all visitors the same way. IQ Audience Plus is a smart, dynamic metering solution that empowers media companies to maximize revenue by identifying key audiences, seeding engagement, and growing membership and subscriptions. Supercharge your consumer revenue, grow engagement, and bolster your advertising income now with IQ Audience Plus. Visit townnews.com EP today to learn more. And hello and welcome. I'm Mike Blinder, publisher of E&P. If you're listening to E&P Reports on a podcast platform, please follow us. Watching us on our YouTube channel, by all means, hit the subscribe button under the screen, smash the bell to the right. Either way, you're going to get an update each and every time we upload a new episode of E&P Reports. In September of 2021, a ballot question to constitutionally protect the independence of local journalism was passed within North America. But it was an amendment to the Constitution of the Muscogee Creek Nation, an indigenous tribe in Oklahoma. Now, you may not think this is newsworthy, but it is, because that is the exception, not the rule. Throughout all of North America, there is not a lot of tribes that have free press, that actually have a press that's not controlled by the government that the people pay taxes to. And this is something that's trying to be changed by a number of different organizations. So let's explore the freedom of the press when it comes to the indigenous population that we share in North America. And we're going to do it with Rob Collins, the project manager with the Oklahoma Media Center and president-elect of Freedom of Information Oklahoma, Angel Ellis, director of Muscogee Media, the independent tribal media agency of the Muscogee Creek Nation, and Sterling Cosper, the membership manager of the Native American Journalists Association. He also serves on the Oklahoma Pro Chapter Society of Professional Journalists. Let's talk freedom of the press with an indigenous population on this episode of E&P Reports. Well, greetings. It's an honor to have all of you with us here today in E&P Reports. And I got to say something right now. Rob, when I first chatted with you about this topic, I found it mind-blowing. I had absolutely no idea that it wasn't normal to have a free press in an indigenous American. I mean, what is the history of this, Rob? Can you just give us a little background?
Well, we have 39 federally recognized tribes in Oklahoma, and only 3 of them are free with independent press. So more than 90%, the vast majority, are not free or independent. And Angel and Sterling can talk about this firsthand. They've kind of been fighting for this, but it was news to me as well. I did not know that. And, we haven't traditionally partnered with indigenous media with the mainstream press here in Oklahoma. So it was a learning experience for me as well.
Angel, do you mind if I jump in real quick? So I actually did a little bit of a write-up on this. We haven't done the full historic, including historians and anthropologists, whatever, all that, and lawyers, to really dig into what happened. But basically you have self-determination in the 30s, a major act, and then again in the 70s, where tribes reformed their government. And obviously they saw a need for some kind of communications outlet. But I really just speculatively think, at least from looking at our tribe, that there wasn't a lot of thought given to what are the ethics, how are we going to brand this content, etc. Is it PR? Is it news? Usually it's undefined, which of course is ethically problematic. But, in a historical context, these major things happened in the 30s, again, the 70s were a big deal to the tribes that lost a lot of stuff. So of course they feel very protectionist about their messaging, about any contact with the outside world. But at the same time, they're growing, making money and gaining sovereignty and power. So there needs to be a mechanism to keep them in check. And it's not the department that sits under the chief, right? And the big complicated thing is that most of these can receive tribal funds, usually casino revenue. So that's the real big thing.
But Sterling, let's stay with you then. Angel, I'm so sorry, you can hum to yourself for just a second, but we're going to get to you in a second. You represent the Native American Journalists Association. You are part of that organization. So we're not just talking Oklahoma here. We're talking across the entire United States. Is there any research on the number of tribes that have a free press versus, or is it most don't? I mean,
we try to stay in touch with them. By the way, I'm former manager of Muskogee Media. It's now director, and Angel now is leading the department in the free press effort. And she carried forward, leadership on that constitutional amendment that our citizens ultimately put away. Formal research is so freaking hard. It costs a lot of money. So basically we just try to stay in touch. So we know of Cherokee, Osage, Navajo, Muskogee, Grand Ronde, and then we heard that the Eastern Band of Cherokee not just recently passed it, but we just recently heard that they had passed measures, and we're actually still trying to get in touch with them.
All right, so there really is no one central, excuse my ignorance. I mean, but
it's complicated, and the thing is, there's different levels of strengths of free press, which is problematic, of course. Like, we always went for the strongest bill, and I think that's why ours was so messy. Because when you're trying to operate under the sovereign and fiscal umbrella, but you're still trying to maintain the editorial separation, it's complicated legally. These laws there's a lot to tie up.
All right, so Sterling, you keep circling back to the one vote that recently happened. I'll go to Angel in this right now with the Muskogee Creek Nation. Did I say that correctly, Angel? That's what we're discussing. Right, yes. And this is what kind of brought it all into the forefront, because for the first time, and I still find this fascinating, for the first time, an actual constitutional amendment has been passed within a specific tribe. Angel, can you just give us the timeline? How did this happen, and what is the final resolution on this right now?
So one of the important things to remember is that, like, in this country, there's 570 plus federally recognized tribes. Right. Most of them, and like here in Oklahoma, there's 39. Right. Most of them have been making their own laws for a very long time. And we're an emerging democracy is what I like to kind of package it as, is we're this emerging democracy. We're building on it every day. So in 2018, our department had law on the books with the tribe. The Muskogee Creek Nation had a code that said there will be a free and independent press. And that was a luxury item. There was only 4 of us back then that had this. And that's about, if you take this into American citizen speak, right? That there's about, 6 million Americans who are tribal citizens, and they don't have the same constitutional rights within their own tribes as they would the federal government. So what we're trying to do is close the gap on this. We recognize that journalism, is a aid in a pillar of democracy. So we want to solidify this, because at the Muskogee Creek Nation in 2018, the council repealed our free press law as we were going into this McGirt decision that shook the whole indigenous world, right? It was something they wanted to control communications on. They didn't want, stories getting out. And we even had a chief go on the record and say that's why they did this.
And the thing to point out here is she's pointing out that the constitutional thing is so important, because now it's the citizens. They can't just go pass a law and repeal it through legislative, executive, regular process. I was involved in getting the original law passed in 2015 in that election. And believe me, that was intense. So I'm more on the down low. The freaking repeal and all the stuff Angel did was very public. But from 2015, when we got this law, all the way through, we've had to fight, even when we were protected with codification. And she's going to have to fight with constitutional protection too.
But
There's a lot of other systemic struggles ahead still.
Let's look at both sides of this up to the group. Okay, we just did an amazing story and follow-up podcast, I should say, with the Society of Professional Journalists. They sent a letter to the White House along with 23 other journalistic organizations saying, we're supposed to have a free press, but you're putting IPOs, information, PIOs, public information officers, not IPOs, not investment, PIOs in our face that we can't. This is how they're still striving to get the information they need, because you said it, Angela, if you call it a democracy, but if you have a government of the people need to have the truth or access
to be able to run the government. Yeah.
Right. Because, absolute power corrupts absolutely. So the other side, the power, even if you're running a business or a government, you're going to want to say, nah, I don't want a press in my face. So there's got to be two sides to this argument. I just assumed within the borders, to look, color me ignorant. I know there are 6 million indigenous people, but I went through high school and college. We didn't study it. We did not.
Nobody did. And that's why this is so important, because we've actually allowed ourselves to be written out of history. Totally. And part of what we're fighting for with these kind of amendments, our citizens are saying that's not the standard we want to live by anymore. We want to have a voice, and we want to write our own stories, and we want to make sure that our stories are a part of that whole bigger message, right? Because
we leave an
left out of the history books.
Right? An accurate history, not a one that our government officials want in the books. The truth.
Right. So back to Muskogee Creek Nation, September 18th, passed by 76.25% of the vote that we want to have an independent free press. This was an amendment to the Constitution for this nation. How large is the nation? How many members in this nation?
Approximately 90,000 Muskogee Creek citizens comprise the Muskogee Creek Nation.
Okay.
Not all in jurisdiction.
Those citizens live all over the world, and a portion of them actually are registered to vote, not all of them. We actually have really low voter ratios to citizenship. So what we had to do was we were required by our law to get 2/3 of that approval. And what we ended up with was 3/4.
Yeah, so a little over 3/4, yeah.
Okay.
Of those people who turned out for the polls, we actually had more people voting on this ballot question for free press than some of these officials who were running in the elections.
Some people didn't vote for anything but free press. They didn't vote for any of the officers. Yes.
All right. So now, how is most press? Let me ask Sterling this, because you're, Native American Journalists Association. Is it advertising supported mostly? Is it subscription supported, or is the money?
That's definitely what I want
money.
Here is the funding. So some of our opponents have been like, well, anybody can start one, but no one has. Look at all the papers in these areas already and how they're doing. We've got to cover a federal level thing. We've got the McGirt case. We've got other federal things. Like, we cannot run it on a shoestring old school advertising budget. And we pitched the public media model. We said, guess what? It's the citizens' money. Whatever you think, how about you give them a chance to see if they think it's a relevant tribal service to fund, and what did they say? You know what I mean?
So in other words,
you can start your own. Well, you know what that left us with? Online anonymous blogs with salacious stuff that didn't follow any editorial standards, and Facebook pages that were not journalism. And that's what people relied on, rather than, our stuff was hard, but it was fair and it followed standards that are recognized universally. So it was tough, but they're better off than that garbage. I'll tell you that.
You are then you're having public funded press in a way through these amendments, or First Amendment, and others I read are underway, or some have been. This is the new trend. So in a perfect world, Angel, a tribe would then have a public funded press. They wouldn't have to worry about subscription revenue, donations, or advertising revenue. However, it would be a free press that the government could not dictate
Right. And our ballot question was unique in that it asked for both funding and for them to kind of stay out of our newsroom, right? So the citizens want to protect our department from being politically influenced, but they understand that this market is not easy to branch into. We have a very, robust news market in Oklahoma. And often the Native American or indigenous perspective is not that big, broad thing that you can sell to advertisers. So in order to go with that model, we would have had to have changed our coverage to what was the most popular. And that would change who we're writing about. But we wanted to make sure that our citizens stayed plugged in, they stayed informed. So we pitched it to them like this is public funds. Why not put some of the public funds to public information, right? And so what we ended up getting was a constitutionally protected press that will have no political influence, but there is also the caveat that they will fund this press as well.
And I started pushing on that because I can tell you under codified protection, talk to any other tribe that has free press, but has to go through a budget hearing every year with the people they cover.
Exactly.
Imagine how that is.
That gets
It
real
was
messy.
terrible every year. It almost made me gag. Yeah. Gross, but it was stressful.
Okay, well, hold on. Just stand by for a second, Angel. Let me stay with you on this, Sterling. So how does that happen? How can you then say I'm taking public money,
right,
but we're not allowed to do political commentary? I mean, is that the future of it? You can't get into public.
That's why you got to write the law and say, look, we have this editorial board. They have to be journalists, wants to be a lawyer. They got to follow SBJ NASA standards, but they receive the funds, and that's the separation. Yes, you are under sovereign fiscal umbrella, but you have committed and made a contract with the people in the department that you will not interfere in the content while you receive that funding.
All right, Angel, you were going to add to that. What were you going to say?
We do cover our elections. We do the coverage. We do write stories about our elected leaders and things like that. The line is drawn when it comes to policy and calling up, say, what we were running into was elected officials were saying, hey, we write the check, put out the information we want. And we've drawn the line in the sand and said, that's not the standard anymore.
See, that's the thing. We had a codified law, but because we had to go under budget hearings, there'd be these, veiled threats, like what was going on with this and that thing. Not an appropriate time. Them as officials should not be using my budget to talk to me about my editorial content. If they had a concern, they could have done it any other time than when they basically had a fiscal gun to my head, to be real blunt about it.
We just had a previous president that was not happy at the reporting of NPR. So he threatened to pull their funding and
that's not the first time that's happened. We know how Mr. Rogers having to do his thing back in the day to save
exactly. I mean, this is an amazing, again, it's mind blowing to me because I've lived in this country for 63 years. I'm considered an educated human being. I just assumed that the democracy I lived in was across the entire land, that you were simply in a tribal situation, you just had your own police department. You follow and maybe your own.
Aren't states and the federal government surprising you more and more lately too, though?
Say that again? What did you say?
Aren't both the state and federal government surprising you a lot lately too, though?
Okay.
I mean, how bad it is.
All right. So Rob, where's the Oklahoma Media Center in all this? You were mostly concerned about this one decision, but are you going to help amplify it across the entire nation? Where's Oklahoma Media Center?
Yes, I mean, we've been partnering with NAJA for best practices training with other non-independent media. And we're kind of an umbrella organization. We're a new statewide collaborative, and we're managed now by the local media association, and we're applying for C3 status. And so Angel is on our board as a future board of directors for the C3 when that becomes official. And we're also making people aware of this very exciting thing now at a time when many people don't trust the media. And I was in for-profit newspapers last year, and we had a 40-year subscriber cancel because we ran the presidential election results. And my goal is that this maybe will spur some free press excitement or interest in the indigenous areas of the country with all of our sovereign nations. And we're also covering the Promised Land subject. And we started doing that and learned a whole lot of new things like this new case.
Okay, we'll talk about the Promised Lands.
Yeah, and that was in the spring.
Right.
We wanted to pick a subject for our collaboration to cover in addition to our training and our funding that we offer.
Right.
And it was a unanimous decision to do the story sharing on the McGirt versus Oklahoma Supreme Court ruling, which basically it's called Promised Land is the name of the subject based on Justice Neil Gorsuch's ruling. And even the governor calls it the most pressing issue for Oklahoma's future. That's been open to debate as far as how much people are concerned about it. But we felt like we did not understand it. We didn't comprehend it. We didn't have the resources to cover it. And we thought collectively we could align those to move the needle, journalistic needle with this to raise awareness about the issue and cover it in a more comprehensive way.
Okay. What about the check your bias thing that you were doing?
Yes.
Was that also through the LMA and the Oklahoma Media Center? Or
It was
that
actually a partnership with Naja, and Sterling was instrumental in that. And we also had.
Well, let's describe that, because I want to educate our audience. Remember, my audience is not your audience. My audience is thousands and thousands of big and small newspaper executives that likely are just as much in the dark as I am right now.
So NAJA, the Native American Journal Association, presented a virtual roundtable for our media collaborators, and Sterling was kind of the moderator. We also had Liz Gray from Angels news organization, the new managing editor there, and then Allison Herrera, who is an Indigenous Affairs reporter at KOSU. And we had a bingo card that was
I saw that
by Naja and High Country News, kind of to help identify stereotypes when reporting in sovereign nations. And they provided historical context, and that built on some other training that Sterling had done on the historical context. And also we had Graham Lee Brewer, who's now with NBC News, doing initial training on how to cover the tribes.
All right.
Because we had this landmark ruling. Go ahead.
I'll just say, Sterling, so this was to educate people outside of the indigenous nations on how to cover you better without prejudice. Do I have that right?
Yeah. Well, so I'm in an interesting place, just kind of coincidentally. I was on the Naja board, then I had to step down when I quit my job at Muskogee Media when I got hired at Naja, but I'm also president of OKSBJ. So I'm on the
Oklahoma Pro Chapter. Okay,
yeah.
Which is the Oklahoma Pro Chapter Society of Professional Journalists.
Correct.
Everything's circling back to Oklahoma for some reason, but this is a national. Angel, you're in Oklahoma as well, correct?
Right.
Yes, sir.
You're all in Oklahoma, but this is a national.
Naja's roots are heavily based in Oklahoma. We have a heavy membership here because of how many tribal media outlets there are. But we, of course, are across the country and are looking to expand all the time. But we always have a very strong Oklahoma presence. Yes.
So in other words, it's not by happenstance, Angel, that this first constitutional amendment would happen in Oklahoma, because that's where most of the energy was brewing. But correct me if I'm wrong, your group will try to replicate this around the country.
Well, in 2015, what happened was, what really helped us that a lot of other tribes don't have is we have Tulsa. We have a major media market covering our officials. So our citizens were able to do a contrast to what was coming out of our paper versus the world. And they're like, something smells fishy, especially once scandals really start ramping up. And once that started happening, legislators started asking questions. And then once you start getting in a fight with legislators, that outside media takes an interest and gives you political momentum to advocate for it. But a lot of other tribal nations do not have a major metropolitan media market to help them like that.
Of course.
And we also have like a really rich press history within our tribal nations in Oklahoma, the Cherokee Phoenix, the McIntosh County, the Indian Journal. These are very historic and very old newspaper legacies. So in these tribes that do have some form of free press, you have a very rich history of a news legacy that has developed in Oklahoma. one of the very first presses that was ever done in an indigenous language was done by the Cherokee, nation. And
Really?
so, yes, this is
like
a very rich tribal environment, and a lot of people don't realize that.
No.
So one of the most famous writers that I can think of that I looked up to, Alexander Posey, was one of the first Native Americans in the state to buy and run his own newspaper. And so we have these legacies of journalists who were important to not only our tribes, but to news in general in the state. And so it's only natural, I think, that we've kind of stood on their shoulders and elevated this even further so that other people can see, that this isn't a standard and we've had to fight for it. And maybe other people will get inspired to do it as well. And we will all at one point, be able to say, hey, we all operate and get our information from a free and independent press.
Rob, you're familiar with ENP, correct? I mean,
Yes, sir.
Of course. Okay. I've only had this publication for 2 years, but I have every single copy of ENP from back to 1884 in a storage shed. It's climate controlled. Sometimes when I really feel nostalgic, I go back and leaf through them. Here in the studio, I have some of the old ones every now and then. I just like to go, I got to be honest with you. This is supposed to be, if you look us up on Wikipedia, the Bible of the U.S. newspaper industry. I'm willing to bet we didn't have 8 pages over the last 100 years on any of this. You see where I'm,
Right.
maybe I'm wrong because I haven't read every issue yet. But I have every issues in archives.org.
Content.
And that's why Indigenous people doing news is important, because our news archives are the roadmaps of history, right? How do you go and do research without these archives? And how do you expect your stories to be told if you're not archiving?
Well, how come okay, I'm going to say this. There is so much out there now about the Black press, Hispanic press, the LGBTQ press, Q plus, excuse me. There's nothing out there about you until this moment, in my humble opinion, at least. And maybe I'm wrong. Maybe everybody's out there buzzing about this. Rob, am I wrong? Or is this just not on the radar of the news publishing industry as a whole?
Well, I think it's a new thing. And one of our collaborators of a non-tribal press mentioned that when Sterling and Angel were talking about this free press initiative and the inspiration there, that they felt like they were literally viewing democracy developing in their own eyes. And we do have the 3 independent tribal media members as collaborators in Oklahoma Media Center. And, we're hoping to do best practice training for some of the other the non-independent, the media relations, public relations, just so they can understand the value of a watchdog press, of transparent coverage and holding, their leaders into account.
Okay, so Sterling, you don't have a loss for words. Wave that magic wand. You've got a big forum right now. I mean, there's a lot of people that have access to our content in the traditional, can I use that term, Sterling? How would you,
mainstream media, is that what you're going for?
I don't want to say mainstream because it makes me sound like I'm making fun. I mean, it's
right. Non-indigenous,
non-indigenous.
Sure, whatever. Yeah.
Okay.
We have indigenous people in major outlets, but yeah.
So wave your hands in the air, scream bloody murder. How can we help as fellow journalists in the same battle? In other words, what I said, we're reporting on battles now to try to make sure we have access to U.S. government employees. We're helping with battles now that there are no news deserts around the country. There's a lot of stuff going on right now. You've got your own battle going on. How can the entire North American press help you? What could we do?
Well, the one thing that's always been a big help is I gave up the best job of my life, and journalists made that worthwhile by covering what I was trying to say was important and why I quit. So what you're doing now is just a continuation of that, and I'd like to see more of it. Another thing I'd ask, and what Naj always wants, is please pay attention to us, go to our site, read our programming about covering Indigenous communities, and hire Indigenous, including for leadership, for more appropriate coverage of our communities in their outlets.
Angel, what would you add to that?
I think that one of the more exciting, those are great points that Sterling's making. I kind of want to plug what Rob is doing a little bit, because
go ahead, take it.
The Oklahoma Media Center is kind of welcoming Indigenous journalists and Indigenous news entities into the fold to work with non-Indigenous ones. And I think that that gives everybody on each table a really valuable, return on their investment. By working with Rob, I'm helping my people learn from some of the best in the industry. And likewise, these collaborations and these partnerships allow the people who are out there doing news to learn how to work with the tribes, because that's not an easy thing to cover. Like you sitting there today, where would you start when you start talking about a tribal Supreme Court case? It's hard to know that. So by collaborating or working with the people who do it already, you kind of help raise that standard to be equal across all levels. We all understand the same things. We learn from each other, and we really do, navigate our communities well, but we might not navigate another community well. So if I'm going to cover, topics with, a Black person, like communities, like topics, I need to collaborate with them and make sure that their voices are the ones being heard. So I think that that's super important going forward, along with hiring Indigenous people, putting them in positions of leadership, because we've seen our Indigenous journalists branch out and go to mainstream news organizations, but then when they pitch, they don't get heard because no one thinks that's big sexy news, right? But we need people in leadership who recognize how important those topics are.
You nailed it right there, because diversity is nothing more than having a number representing different people, but inclusion and equity is a whole different battle in these newsrooms. Rob, she made you the star. I mean, basically, it's
their story, really, and we're fortunate to be able to learn from them as well, because it's an inspirational story what's happening in the Muskogee Creek Nation, which is in the thick of the whole ramifications of the McGirt ruling regarding tribal sovereignty as well. So it's been an eye-opening situation for us in this vastly evolving story, and this is a really interesting component of that.
Well, as someone whose main reason why we acquired, my wife and I, E&P, was to hope to continue to fight for a free press, which is, I always say, some very imperfect men over 200 years ago wrote a perfect document, and in it they understood the need for a check on power as part of that system. We're behind you here at E&P. We'll help amplify your message. Speaking of which, Rob, if anyone right now wants to learn more about this issue or wants to be involved, where do they go? Is there one central place that the LMA is now hosting to have this information, a vertical of some kind?
Well, probably for the Oklahoma-centric stuff regarding all the subject, I would go to oklahomamediacenter.com.
Okay.
We have links to stories on the Free Press Initiative, the trainings that Naja's done, the Check Your Bias training. Also, we update daily stories from our 25 plus media partners on the Promised Land coverage of McGirt, which is evolving and very, very interesting subject. And so that would probably be the one-stop shop for now. But we're really trying to drive attention and drive traffic to our media collaborators. We do links to all their stories. It is a public-facing site, but ultimately the news groups in OMC are the pillars of the group, and we want to help increase their audience. That's a big part of our mission. Also, just kind of diversifying ways that we can make revenue to sustain the industry, and we're looking for collaborators for the future.
The Native American Journalist Association, Sterling, is NAJA newsroom.com. Do I have that right, sir?
Yeah, you can just do naja.com though. That one will do it. That'll redirect. They go the same place.
And of course, I'm sure you're looking for any support or at least awareness for your organization as well, correct?
Yeah, I mean, go check it out. We have all of our stuff with OMC, plus the stuff we've done independently and all kinds of subjects, webinars, especially through COVID, on all kinds of relevant Indigenous coverage subjects. Plus we have resource guides, you name it. One-stop shop, and we're always adding. And we're responding to poor coverage of Indigenous communities as well.
Wow, this has been a mind-blowing, eye-opening, I'll keep using all these old metaphors, but I actually have enjoyed this It teaches me that there is so much to learn, and there's so many ways for us to become aware. I applaud you, all your different organizations. I wish there was a way to get you more centralized. I think you said it right there, Angel. This is my personal 2 cents. I can pontificate because it's my show. I can do whatever I want. But Angel, I think you're right. By collaboration, does that make sense? Sharing. If you can get the big and the small all over, all the tribes to work together and share, there would be strength in numbers, in my opinion.
Absolutely, because we saw how those collaborations work intertribally. We've seen the 39 tribes of Oklahoma team up and do marketing. So the same concept applies. We all walk away with something. And I'm telling you, like, one of the coolest things was to see my newsroom journalists were working on coverage, and then to see some bigger organizations pick up the work they do and include that. It's like, hey, we just stepped up a notch, and to see our reporters' faces when they get a byline on somebody who's bigger than our organization. It's a great learning experience. It's a great skill build. It's a great portfolio builder. And so these other organizations are gaining firsthand insights into how to cover Indigenous communities and how to get these different channels to work with you and give you information. And so it's been a really conducive environment to foster a better news ecosystem.
Rob, Angel, Sterling, thanks for your time. Thanks for the message. And thanks for your hard work. We really appreciate it. You have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.